Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're just waiting for people to slowly connect in and join, so please hang tight as we have folks join. Thanks so much for making it. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining, for making it, and welcome to the first session in our Policy Matters series. Today's session is about activating youth delegations. So you will see that we are on the first session of our series. So thank you so much for making it. Before we get started, I want to do a quick introduction. My name is Erika Dupuis, and I am the Community Engagement and Gender Equality Specialist at the Ontario Council for International Cooperation. And it's my pleasure today to be able to hold this space and actually hand it off to some amazing young people who are really creating change in the space of youth delegations and youth advocacy. Before we get started, I do want to have a quick land acknowledgement, recognizing that the Ontario Council for International Cooperation's office sits on the unceded territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This is known along settler colonial lines as Toronto or Tiggeronto. But I also want to acknowledge that all of us are joining from different places across Turtle Island, that we all live, work, and play on different Indigenous communities in traditional territory. And I hope that all of you will hold this in your heart and use this opportunity for land acknowledgement to frame the way that you engage in today's sessions. But for me, when I think about a land acknowledgement, I use it as a framework to reflect on the fact that we exist in spaces, we live, work, play, exist on land that was unceded by Indigenous communities, and therefore we have a responsibility and role in ensuring that we are fighting for justice and showing up better. So I hope that you will take advantage of all the amazing lessons from today to use to learn how to be a better ally in solidarity and in pursuit of social justice. So with that, I would love to hand it off to the moderator for today's session. I'll give a quick introduction before I hand it off. Today's moderator is a young person, just like all of you, Erika Dupuis, who is a frontline social worker in the Greater Toronto area. Erika is also a member of our Youth Policymakers Hub and an incredible advocate for young people everywhere. They have a lot of experience in consulting with USAID, Save the Children, and the World Health Organization, orienting themselves from the perspective of community development and youth engagement, particularly in the space of youth health equity. In early 2021, Erika participated in the Canadian delegation to the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and also sits on the Queer Youth Constituency within the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, as well as the Global Rainbow Coalition, a subsection of the Commonwealth Youth Gender Equality Network. Erika is also a Y7 delegate for Canada to the 2021 Y7 through the Young Diplomats of Canada. And it's with this great honor that I hand it off to Erika, today's moderator. Erika, over to you.
Thanks so much, Anika, and thanks so much for that introduction. Hello and welcome, folks. It's such a pleasure, honor, and privilege to be here today. So what we're going to be doing today, this is a panel session, and we're really going to be talking about the opportunities and the value provided by young people that are involved in forums, whether it's at the domestic and national level, or even at the international multilateral level, as a way to map kind of the need for increased youth participation and youth involvement in these spaces. We have a couple of amazing panelists lined up for folks as well, and I'll be introducing them in a few seconds. But as well, thank you so much again for folks for joining us today, and would love any and all kind of comments or questions as you see fit in the chat as well. So first off, I'm going to introduce some of our speakers today. So first we have Panthea Pourmalek. Panthea has recently graduated from University of British Columbia with an undergraduate honors degree in political relations. He is also a policy and research volunteer with the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, and recently created a set of guidelines for equitable selection and support of youth delegation to international conferences, such as the HLFP. Panthea is really passionate about facilitating dynamic and meaningful inclusion of racialized women, youth, and gender minorities in important conversations and decision-making tables. Panthea is also quite involved in women, peace, and security, as well as youth, peace, and security agendas. As well, we also have Jeffery Qi. Jeffery is the coordinator of Multilateral Affairs at the British Council for International Cooperation's Youth-Led Climate Change branch. He's also a graduate student of the University of British Columbia, completing a master's degree in political science and international relations. He's been an NGO observer in the climate negotiations since 2017 and has co-managed multiple BCCIC youth delegations to UN climate change. He is specialized in the Paris Agreement and cycle negotiations and the implementation of international health regulations as well. And finally, we have Christina Coette. Christina is a public policy and foreign affairs analyst with the Government of Canada. Currently, she is a fellow in the Policy Analyst Recruitment and Development Program at Natural Resources Canada, where she contributes to Canada's lands and minerals sector as a part of the Critical Minerals Task Force. As well, Christina has represented Canadian youth at multiple international forums, more recently on engaging sustainable development platforms in Japan and Guatemala. As a graduate student, she gained on-the-ground experience in diplomacy as a public affairs trainee, and as well has participated and worked with the Embassy of Ireland in Ottawa. She currently serves as the recruitment lead for the Young Diplomats of Canada, where she contributes to developing the next generation of young policy thinkers and decision makers. So just a little bit about our panelists, but folks are definitely going to be hearing a lot more about their work and their connection to whether it's domestic or global delegations as well. So really excited to have this panel once again. I keep saying that, but it is a really exciting day. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of pass it off to some of the panelists just to introduce themselves a little bit more, kind of talk about their position, the work that they do. And then we're going to kind of move into more of a Q&A type session. We're going to chat a bit more about some kind of more specific details around delegations and all of that kind of work. But the first thing I guess I'll do is I will pass it over to Panthea, who's going to kick us off in terms of just chatting about each and one of our panelists. So Panthea, take it away.
Awesome, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, perfect. So just to introduce myself, my name is Panthea. I'm calling in today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, also known as Burnaby in British Columbia. I'm really excited to speak to you all today. So just a little bit about myself. As was mentioned just now by Erika, I just finished up an undergraduate degree in political science. And my interests in the area of, I guess, policy mostly have to do with conflict. So what happens in wartime and after wartime and during civil wars and all the different kinds of things we can do in that context, policy-wise. But what I want to talk to you guys about in the next couple minutes is also something that was just mentioned, which is the set of guidelines that I developed for youth delegations or delegations that include youth as part of my work as a volunteer at BCCIC. So this was the very first project that I worked on at BCCIC. And when I guess my team leader suggested that we work on this, I was really, really enthusiastic about it because I knew a lot of folks that had gone to delegations, and all of them had some really great stories to share and some really not good stories to share. So I knew that there was a lot that could be improved when it came to how youth are treated as delegates and as part of delegations. And so to make these guidelines, we did some primary research, some interviews with folks that were current or past delegates, looking at what they needed most in their delegations or from organizations that are sending them as delegates to various high-level conferences, and looking at how we can reflect and have better, organizational practices to target the areas that need improvement. So the main thing that really we're concerned with here is looking at meaningful inclusion versus just inclusion or tokenizing youth. And this is especially important for youth that are BIPOC, LGBTQ+, folks with diverse abilities, women, for whom spaces like high-level political conferences or being part of delegations can actually be, very scary or even violent or unwelcoming places, especially when they're starting out or approaching these environments for the first time. But the good news is that with the advice and guidance of all of the delegates that I interviewed, and also taking best practices from lots of different organizations in Canada and beyond, we were able to make these guidelines to address some of these areas. So from the moment you put out as an organization a call to action to when you select your delegates or interview them, you train them, you support them, you send them off to travel or go to a conference virtually, the kind of goals you give them, what you expect them to bring back to their community, how they engage with their community, all of that stuff is addressed in these guidelines. These are really useful for organizations, but also for any youth in the audience or many youth in the audience. I think this is a really valuable resource to look through and see what you can expect or what you should expect as a youth delegate when you're selected or asked to attend a conference. And to know that the more clear your understanding of what your role is or what is expected of you, the more you're also going to get out of that experience. And you're going to make sure that it's a positive experience and that you're going to want to go back and continue doing this instead of just being, very shocked the first time around and then avoiding delegations forever. I think the really important takeaway point here is that even though this is something that's difficult or maybe unwelcoming or scary for a lot of us, we have a lot to contribute. And we also have a lot to contribute to making delegations safer and better and more welcoming for other youth. And so like writing these guidelines and all the people who share their experiences with me is one way of doing this. We really know best what we need. And so with communication and working on that, we can make sure that delegations get better and better. And so one final, I guess, piece of advice that I've received that I want to share with you guys and anyone who might be interested in being a delegate has to do with once, you enter your first conference, you go to your first event. I think for me, I had a very scary experience the first time I did this, and I received some really good advice that whenever you're in a space where you feel like you don't belong or you feel like you have imposter syndrome or that everyone knows what they're doing, they're better than you, just remember that sometimes it's not you that's the problem, but rather the spaces that you're going into weren't designed to include you. And maybe a lot of times for me as a woman, maybe they were designed to exclude me very specifically when they were created. So it's not necessarily that we don't fit in, but maybe spaces are designed to push us out. But with every new person who, joins a high-level forum or conference and maybe isn't so welcome there, you're creating more space that people like you can occupy in the future. And that's something really important that I like to think about every time I feel like I'm experiencing imposter syndrome, and hopefully something that you folks can carry with you as well. Yeah, so that's it for me. I guess I will pass it back to Erika.
Awesome. I just cut out there a little bit, but I just jumped back in. So thank you so much, Panthea, for that. And I think you're really bringing forward such an important point about the key to success in delegations, it is kind of the delegates themselves, but it's equal parts though as well, the work that the organization does behind the scenes in order to set up those meaningful experiences for young people. So that's really great and brilliant point that you bring out that I'm super mindful as well. So brilliant. Thank you so much. And so we'll pass it over to Jeffrey for introduction as well. Take it away, Jeffrey.
Actually, I feel like Christina would be better placed to talk about the youth one. Yes, Erika.
Absolutely. My apologies. Sorry, Christina. We'll hand it over to you. My apologies.
Not at all. Thanks for the introduction, Erika. I believe Annika is just getting a few slides for me to share, and there they are. So to introduce myself again, my name's Christina Coette. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining today from Treaty 6 territory, which is now commonly known as Edmonton, Alberta. So my educational background, I have a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Alberta, and I continue to do a Master of Arts in European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at Carleton University. So I first became involved with international affairs and youth delegations during my undergraduate degree. The first step for me was simply going abroad through various exchange opportunities at my university. And from there, I had opportunities to represent both my university and Canadian youth at various youth gatherings and multilateral forums. From there, I've now worked for the Government of Canada as a policy analyst with natural resources. But what I want to speak more today is my experience with Young Diplomats of Canada. So I'm currently the recruitment lead at Young Diplomats of Canada, and you may have heard in Erika's profile that their current former delegate, the Y7 just occurred, so still very active though. But to introduce who we are and what we do, the Young Diplomats of Canada is a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that promotes the leadership of young Canadians through international delegations, research projects, and advocacy initiatives. So we promote hands-on training programs and establish key partnerships that give our delegates exclusive access to high-level geopolitical and global governance summits. And some of our more popular forums include the Y7 and the Y20. So Y7, Erika is a current delegate, Anika is actually a Y20 alumni, but some of our other delegations include the World Bank Group and International Monetary Fund, both the spring and annual meetings. We have the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the World Trade Organization, and as of last year, we gained consultative status with the United Nations, so we now have 3 delegations that go and participate at various ECOSOC meetings. So I see actually in the audience today, we have a few current delegates and an alumni here as well. So for anyone who hasn't heard of YDC before or know about our delegations, I would encourage you to go to our website. Now's a perfect time to do so because we just launched recruitment on Monday actually for the World Bank Group and International Monetary Fund annual meetings, the World Trade Organization meetings, as well as the Commission on the Status of Women, which will be the 2022 delegation that goes in person, fingers crossed, to New York next year. So what I want to say about Young Diplomats of Canada is a bit of echoing at what Panthea said. We recognize that not all youth delegations are created equally, not all youth opportunities are created equally. At Young Diplomats of Canada, we really try to create a meaningful experience for our youth to go and either be more active participants in delegations, such as those who attend the Y7 and Y20, who draft a communique which the G7 and G20 leaders read and incorporate parts of into their communique, or to learn and develop their professional skills through our educational delegations, such as through the World Bank Group and International Monetary Fund or the World Trade Organization. Like other organizations, we've been improving our diversity inclusion in past years, and we know that while we give a platform for youth to be at the table at multilateral forums where they may not necessarily have a seat before, we also recognize that matters who are the youth that get to sit at these tables. And even in the past, we haven't seen diversity in the types of youth that get to sit at these different multilateral forums. So I was actually one of the people who was reading Panthea and the British Columbia Council on International Cooperation's report on the Youth Delegation Selection Support Guidelines. I was there at the webinar in January scribbling down notes, and we think that one area that all youth delegations can improve on is on some of those diversity and inclusion guidelines. So I'll end it there, and I think we'll touch on that a bit in the questions and answers later, but pass it over to Erika again.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Christina. Thank you, Jeffrey, for catching me earlier. Appreciate it. But no, Christine, that was brilliant. And it was great context as well for the work that you're currently doing and the work of YDC as well, and all of the different delegations that are a part of that process. So brilliantly put. Thank you so much. And now I will pass it over to our good friend, Jeffrey now.
Thanks, Erika. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffery Qi. I'm currently based in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people, now known as Vancouver, specifically the UBC campus. I'm the coordinator for Climate Multilateral Affairs at the BCCIC Climate Change, which is a fully youth-led program under the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation. It's a fancy title, but essentially what I do is just managing the international climate policy of BCCIC and its flagship program, which is the Youth Delegation to UN Climate Change Conferences. So a bit background about me, I first joined the UNCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations back in 2017, when I was just in first year of university. I applied through the International Forestry Students Association and got into this UN climate change space, and it was an amazing experience. I came back from Germany and joined BCCIC because they were looking for a youth engagement intern. And I was very lucky to be able to get that position and then built the BCCIC's youth engagement and climate change delegation process hearing on. So over the years, we've been sending youth to these United Nations climate negotiations twice a year. One is technical and the other is political. So in between those big conference of parties, those COPs that people always talk about, there's a smaller negotiation session in between, usually in May or June, that are purely technical negotiations. What are the reporting tables countries should use? What are the time frame for implementation? How do we account for greenhouse gas emission? So that is kind of what I mainly work on, those geeky tables and data stuff. But over the years, we are very lucky to be able to send over 33 youth delegates to these conferences since 2017. You know, it's really a learning by doing experience for us at BCCIC. When I first joined, I was second year students. I didn't know how to lead a project. I didn't know how to manage these complex multi-stakeholder events. And BCCIC placed a lot of trust in the young people who volunteer, who intern, who work for the organization, that allowed us to really learn by doing all of these amazing stuff we do at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. For many of us, it is our first time, for many young people, it is our first time stepping into those gigantic conference halls or one of those negotiation tables and speak on behalf of a group of people, speaking on behalf of youth from British Columbia. And that's an immense privilege, but also it is very daunting. It is very scary, like Panthea have talked about. And the one thing we do to kind of ease that concern is to have the capacity building way before any youth delegates going to the conferences. So any BCCIC climate change youth delegates will go through a 3-month training period on public speaking, how to do climate negotiations, what are the negotiation items that are being talked about, how to network and meet and advance policies with high-level officials and politicians who are at these conferences. You know, this is something that we focus a lot on, and that kind of builds the confidence and builds the knowledge one would need to go to these negotiations and to make an impact. Of course, we can't really teach everything beforehand. A lot of the learning is happening by actually being there, by doing things, and by meeting with people, by meeting with experts and colleagues from all over the world. And that is such an impactful experience for our youth delegates, and they will carry with them into their future careers. So our alumni now works at Environment Climate Change Canada, different government ministries. A few of them work in the international organizations that are working on climate change. So we are very proud of our alumni and alumnas. Yeah. So I just want to kind of echo what Panthea and Christina has mentioned, kind of that diversity aspects and this imposter syndrome at these international conferences. I fully agree with Panthea that this space, it's not young people's problem that you are feeling scared or feeling not included. It's the space. Young people have been engaging in UN climate change since 2009 in Copenhagen. Compared to the entire UN Framework Convention, it is a relatively short period when young people actually have the rights to sit at a table, to sit at a decision-making table. And that space isn't designed for young people. There are so many acronyms. There are so many technical details that we have to remember before going into one of these conferences. So what we want to do is build on the young people who engaged back in 2009, who opened this space up for the young people today. And really kind of drive that inclusion and drive this notion that young people have a right and deserve to be at the decision-making table, especially in terms of climate change, which is one of the crises, well, the only crisis that will define our future, especially for young people. So at these conferences, we want to make two impacts. What the impacts on the global climate agenda, how do young people kind of bring in their lived experiences, their local knowledge, their kind of grassroots mobilization and grassroots organizing into these international conferences and really drive the message that we need urgent climate action. And secondly, we want to have an impact on our own youth delegates to build their knowledge, to build their confidence and build their experience so that they will continue to engage in this space and benefits many, many generations forward. I guess to kind of close this off, I'm really excited to be here and be with this amazing panel of young people and discuss our experience and our insights. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Erika. Thank you.
Perfect. No, thank you, Jeffrey. Really appreciate what you just mentioned and kind of mapping out your journey as well. I really resonate with kind of the point around knowing by doing as well. Can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure other folks on the panel as well who've been approached by other young people saying, I feel like I don't have the experience or the expertise or so on and so forth. And it's really about not the specific expertise of being a part of these multilateral international forums, but rather exactly the point that you brought back to, more so around community organizing, your lived experiences, and so on and so forth. That's really the powerful tool and what you can bring to these forums. So really brilliant point. Right now, we'll kind of move into a little bit more of kind of a question or Q&A, kind of question commentary style. I'll ask a couple of questions, but I totally encourage folks who are here with us right now to also populate maybe any questions that may be coming up for you in the chat, and we'll answer those a little bit later on. But the first question that I have, folks, and folks feel free to jump in kind of at any point, the three of you. But my first question for you all is why, and it kind of seems like a generic, like we kind of already know the answer to this question, but I do want to ask it anyways, is that why do the interests of young people matter at these high level political forums? Or if not, how have you seen maybe the interests of young people kind of play out into tangible policy recommendations at these forums or proposals or so on and so forth? So really either, why do these voices matter at this level? Which goes without saying, but I do want to hear it. And then as well, if you've ever seen kind of really the youth voice play out and what that experience has looked like for you. So feel free to chime in, folks.
I guess I will break the ice here. So as I mentioned, kind of young people have this right, not a privilege. We have a right to be at a decision-making table. There are so many different international agreements and international conventions that guarantees children and youth's rights in the international sphere. And especially in terms, I work in climate change, and this is the crisis that we will face for generations to come. And the Paris agreements specifically will be the last climate agreements that we will ever have. It has a self-renewing and continuation mechanism that renews itself every 5 years. So this is the last chance that we got to shape an international agreement that will guarantee our survival and our natural ecosystem survival for generations to come. So a lot of the things that are being discussed right now in these Paris Agreement negotiations are related to things that will happen in 2040 and 2050. But they're not currently being discussed right now. So young people will have to be there, because by the time it's 2040, 2050, it will be our generations. We will feel the impact of climate change at that point. So we have, our lived experiences, our voices, and our opinions matter in these negotiations. And we will do everything we can we must do everything we can to shape the agreement to be as ambitious as it could possibly be to meet that 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius goal. But yeah, that's just my take.
Absolutely. And brilliantly said. Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Christina.
Well, I'll build on what Jeffrey said. He absolutely got the textbook answer that the decisions that are being made right now are going to have consequences that last into the future and impact our lifetime. So we absolutely have to be arrayed at the table simply because of that. Furthermore, I think a lot of us recognize the importance of having diversity around decision-making tables, but sometimes we can forget that, diversity with the youth perspective in there is another type of diversity that is often lacking. It's not only something that we should be doing, it's something that makes teams and policies better. Youth bring innovative ideas, they have different lived experiences that are actually going to improve decisions for the future. And I would add that also by having young people engage in these conversations at the onset, it really creates buy-in to these organizations for the future, in my opinion. I mean, there's the quote from President Trump that NATO is obsolete. Well, and there's also comments that people don't necessarily support the United Nations and what do they do? Well, I think that if you went and you saw, you would certainly understand the importance of these institutions. So I think that's also why it's important. Have you think at the table now will ensure the buy-in and the stability of such institutions for the future.
And if I can just add on quickly, I think one thing that I'll say, I stole this from another event I went to this morning. The UN Secretary General's Office Youth Division just launched a report this morning on civic spaces for youth. And something that was mentioned in the launch for that this morning is that a lot of times we assume that youth need to be included in these conversations and in these rooms because they are the leaders of the future, where in reality, that's not true. Youth are the leaders of today. So they don't just deserve a spot because they're going to live in the future, but because actually they're on the front lines doing all the groundwork right now. So they have expertise that literally no other actors has from their current experience that they can share. And so if anything, that makes them so much more deserving of being at these tables and sharing what they know. And the outcome or the products of these processes are really incomplete and unsustainable when those voices aren't included.
Absolutely. I'm feeling so energized by these responses as well. Thank you so much, crew. Absolutely. And I see the chats, like the comments are just pouring in right now as well, just in agreement. Based on the comments and kind of questions I'm seeing pop up, I will jump into my next question, which may cover some answers maybe to some questions that are kind of brewing in the chat. But what advice would you folks have for young people who are maybe interested in joining a delegation, for a young person who maybe predominantly kind of organizes or is engaged at a community level? How important do you think the role of community-based work plays into being an effective delegate?
I might start off here, given my role as recruitment lead with Young Diplomats of Canada. I noted a few questions on in the chat on eligibility criteria for Young Diplomats of Canada delegations as well. I think that, firstly, you should never screen yourself out. I know that a lot of us, myself included, experience imposter syndrome, and we think, oh, there certainly will be someone more qualified than me. No, like it is you, and you should apply. For YDC delegations, since we recruit young people to go to international multilateral fora, I know one of the most popular questions we have is people wondering if they can attend even if they don't have that international background or delegation experience in the past. And you absolutely still can attend. Erika, I actually remember watching the Instagram live that Mojan Zibapour, the Y7 2021 delegate, did on Instagram, and how you said that you don't have a lot of international background experience, but you leveraged your, more domestic and local grassroots experience to be a delegate. And I mean, certainly you succeeded in that. So my advice would be, you can be a generalist. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in one thing, although if you're passionate about one thing, like Jeffrey certainly is about climate change, absolutely lean into that. But all of those seemingly small or grassroots experiences you have are how everyone starts out. And those will lend themselves really well to international fora, in my opinion.
Yeah, kind of building on what Christina has said, climate change is such a vast field of work, but it's also interconnected with many other aspects, gender, national security, and often young people are driving local change and community actions that could be replicated around the world. So a part of I think a purpose for youth delegation is for young people to gain that international experience. So having that barrier there that you have to have international policy experience is self-defeating for a youth delegation. And over the years, at least from our experience, we found that young people who have this passion in climate change, but they don't necessarily have prior experience, we welcome them into our delegation because they provide so much different perspectives than folks who might be working in climate change for a very long time, and that bring that new blood and new passion into this space. So definitely agree with what Christina has talked about. Kind of, you can be the generalist and attend these international conferences and never limit yourself. Always hit that apply button, because when I first applied, I had no experience at all, and somehow I got selected, and now that kind of launched my career in this field. So don't be afraid to hit that apply button, even though you feel like you're experiencing imposter syndrome and stuff.
Yeah, and to build on what Jeffrey said, just to give a bit of a different angle, I think I would very, very strongly encourage you to be very ambitious with the things you apply for. For smaller organizations or for youth that are working at grassroots levels, I think one thing that I used to do that I found was a lot more successful than I anticipated is literally just going and finding all of your organizations that are nearby locally that have ECOSOC status with the UN, and emailing them and being like, I'm a part of a youth organization. We don't have consultative status with the UN. Can we join your delegation? And the answer was almost always yes. Getting to these opportunities is actually a lot less competitive than we imagine when we're on the side of the applicant. So I would definitely encourage you to just reach out to organizations whose work maybe aligns with your own organization, your own activism, or your own interests, even if maybe they don't have an open call for applicants, and just let them know. And I think you'd be surprised at how successful that strategy can be as a way of getting started. And then once you build the experience, then you do become the quote unquote qualified candidate.
If I can add one more comment there based on what Panthea said, people may be wondering where to find opportunities besides just Googling and searching for things. If I can put in a plug for YDC once again, we actually have a youth organization database, which we're currently in the process of revamping and relaunching. The one that's listed on the website right now has 210 youth-led and youth-serving organizations that are categorized by province, by area of expertise. But we recently received a grant through the Fast Forward 2020 Summit that was funded by RBC Future Launch Program, where we're expanding the database and adding new categories such as youth delegation opportunities available, etc. I'll note that YDC is an entirely volunteer-led organization, so this database is not perfect. We're doing our best to keep it updated and provide the most current information for people, but I'll post in the chat. It might be a good place to start, especially when it's relaunched in mid-July, August time.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thanks, folks, so much. This next question, I'm really, really curious to hear the responses. I'm going to kind of mix two together for sake of time, and it might answer some questions that may be popping up in the chat as well. But based on your experiences What are the main barriers to youth participation in these spaces or in delegations? And as well, what do you think needs to be done or considerations that need to continue to be undertaken to ensure that delegate recruitment is as accessible, equitable, and meaningful as possible?
I can start off. I think I just want to make a small note about things that maybe we don't necessarily consider to be barriers that are very real barriers. So when I was talking to delegates and interviewing them for the youth guidelines, one of the most common things that came up is that women and BIPOC youth and youth that are gender diverse have a really hard time at security in buildings where they have to go to these conferences or at airports. It's very stressful for them. Lots of them have had very negative experiences with security at the UN, security at the parliament here in Canada. So very small things that you might not even think about that aren't so deep. It's not about the environment, not feeling like you belong, but literally like security guards being very discriminatory when you're trying to go into the parliament in Canada and Ottawa, that are really big barriers. So looking at the very small details through the journey. I mean, I know we're not traveling now, but in the future that your delegates might experience, and making sure that you're helping them out there, or making sure that, you know, if like, for example, some delegates from BC go to events in areas that don't have so much racial diversity. And they told me that's the first time I'm the only person of color in the room and there's hundreds of people around me. And that's very shocking for me and hard to take in. So things that we might not think about right off the bat, but that affect people really deeply. So, and of course, I think the best way to find out about those things is to talk to those delegates and the youth themselves. But being mindful of those things as organizations is really important.
Oh, okay, cool. I'll go. So in addition to what Panthea has talked about, we definitely had instances where security guards at UN venues in different countries that are being inappropriate or discriminatory to our delegates or to our youth colleagues. These issues are constantly being raised with the UN, and they are trying to do better, but it's not enough. And definitely as young people and as youth leaders who are in there, we have to demand UN to do better when hiring local security contractors and security companies and ensure training on these different areas. And in addition to those invisible barriers, there are the larger ones. I think I saw from the chat questions about funding and financing these trips. So definitely that is one of the biggest barrier for any young people. You have to have an affluent family to be able to travel to these conferences and self-fund your hotel and flight ticket and meals and stuff. And that's incredibly expensive. Secondly, I think I also saw from a chat there's the disability concern. International travel is presents itself a hardship for a person with disability to travel to a whole different country. And sometimes the meeting venues may not meet disability accessibility requirements. So that itself is also a barrier when participating actually in the conferences. And third, what we found over the years is rural communities. So all of these delegations, at least for BCCIC, we are based in Vancouver, and a lot of our applicants are from big cities, Victoria or Vancouver, but not enough from rural areas or from the inland BC area. That kind of traveling for a very long period of time to the mainland and then go to international conferences itself is a challenge, and also time commitment and all of other things. These are the biggest barriers for young people. I know RBC Future Launch is a fantastic program that has provided us with funding to fund youth delegates traveling to international conferences, but these are just there are very few opportunities for funding, and that's definitely one of the biggest challenges to engage in this space.
I'll echo everything that Panthea and Jeffrey said, but especially highlight the time and the funding barriers. One thing that I'll highlight about YDC delegations is, as mentioned, we're volunteer run and led, and unfortunately we don't have funding to support our delegates, which is something that we're constantly trying to change and we're constantly trying to find. But without a constant stream of support, we're unfortunately asking delegates to self-fund. So one thing that I would ask organizations to have capacity is, if you can pay for the time and the expenses of your youth delegates, they absolutely need that, and that will only help increase the diversity of the types people can apply. And I will also, call out ourselves at Young Diplomats of Canada. For this year, we sent our first virtual delegation to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We recruited 3 fantastic, outstanding delegates, of one of which, Sarah Hansen, actually sits on the OCIC Youth Policymakers Hub with Erika. And honestly, they called us out. They said, not only do their support for First Nations people, Indigenous people, to get funding to travel to these conferences, but the onus should be on the organization. You should find the funding for us so we can go, and it's not the time and effort put on us. And they absolutely agree. And we've been working with them to apply for some different grants to help support the 2022 delegates to go to the United Nations Permanent Forum on the ground in New York City. It's not perfect. We don't see funding just fall into our hands tomorrow. It does take work, but if you're committed to including youth in these delegations, I think that's one meaningful step you can take to ensure that more types of youth can participate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much. We need to continually be having these discussions, right? It's not enough just to have a one-off kind of comment. Like, these are routine conversations that we need to be having, not only in our organizing spaces, but just at a kind of structural level within organizations as well. So I really appreciate kind of all those thoughts and sentiments. So even though I have a couple of questions left, the chat is like going full steam ahead. I love it so much. So we're going to jump into some more questions that are coming from the chat right now. So I'll pose these to the panelists as well. So thank you so much, everyone. There's a lot of movement in the chat. So I'm getting the questions at kind of a later point. So I won't be able to make explicit reference to the individual who posted or posed the question. So my apologies for that. But if you have any follow-up or any comments or anything like that, feel free to go ahead in the chat. So one of the questions I will pose is, someone wrote, can you share some advice you might have for those of us who don't yet understand how to connect our personal lives to these policy-making spaces? Really love that question. And panelists, no worries, give yourself a couple of seconds, kind of think it through. And if anything comes to mind, jump in.
I can start. So I think one thing that's really important to just remember is that when we talk about valuing like personal experiences as much as professional experiences, it's not necessarily that you need to have this like very dramatic, like movie-esque moment in your life where something happened to you and it added value to you that you can now go and share at these conferences or high-level fora, but more so that your experiences can help you develop communication skills, critical thinking skills, a network within your own community, understanding of how your community members interact with each other, the context that you live in, what your country does well and what your country needs. These are all things that you know about by virtue of living for X many years in a certain place or in multiple places or immigrating or moving. And so those are the things that are going to help you be productive in these spaces. You don't necessarily need to have to cite these things as, I don't know, accelerants for change, but just recognize that they give you the ground to stand on, and the things that you say on that basis have worth and value to them, just as much as someone who has a degree or who has years of experience at a conference. So it's not so much that you need to make an active effort to take your real life experiences and translate them to something meaningful, but just recognize that that gives you kind of the qualification to speak and to speak proudly.
Yeah, I would add that one of my personal lived experiences that I've connected to my work at YDC has been, I was born and raised in Alberta, and access to French training is just not as extensive as it is in other provinces, well, such as Ontario, and then the inverse, English language training in Quebec. So I know previously for Young Diplomats of Canada delegations, it was seen as like much more of an asset to be bilingual, but I've tried to pivot that in that Of course, we want to create spaces for the Francophones of Canada to be on these delegations and participate as well. But for those people who may, come from rural areas or come from provinces where there was no access to French language education, they still should have an equal chance to participate in delegations, given that diverse experience there. So it's definitely a benefit to have bilingualism in delegations, and especially for summits that occur in French-speaking countries, such as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in France. But I think we've looked more critically at the importance of that. It's one example of my lived experience coming into play.
Yeah, so kind of, I feel like I always ask myself this question, why do I care enough to be at these international conferences? Or like, what drives me to hop on that midnight flight to whichever country that I'm going to? And that feeds into the importance, or feeling the importance of the work that we are doing at these international conferences. What we are doing is to protect the future for future generations to come, and to ensure that multilateralism continues to be a cornerstone of today's international order. And building on what Panthea has talked about, yeah, that's kind of build on what Panthea has talked about. But other very important aspect of international conferences is the networking aspect. You will meet so many different people, so many different experts, so many different colleagues from all over the place. And sometimes, and sometimes the country negotiators are also very friendly as well, because they were young people once before. They apply for their jobs when they're young, and so they have a lot of experiences to share with youth delegates at there. And from our experience, it's usually been a very positive experience talking with, especially Canadian negotiators. They're always willing to give a lot of tips, a lot of advice, and it's about kind of connecting your personal passion and actually just treating everyone as human, not just country negotiator, not just might be enemy of the climate, and talk to them. And they will share their experience with you. They will give you tips. They will give you a lot of different advice that will carry forward your career in this area, and also give you a lot of insights on kind of what they're thinking and how they are thinking this problem through. So I feel like that's also a very important part of how you link your personal experience and personal passion to this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so easy to kind of say, and then Jeffrey, you've put it a lot more eloquently, but find what you're passionate about, right? And just let that kind of lead and guide you. But then also kind of what Panthea mentioned as well, it doesn't necessarily need to be this big boom or resounding moment in which, your passion either flourished or you were changed forever. I mean, that may be a possibility, and absolutely for folks with varying and different lived experiences, right? But it's really all about going back to connecting the passion with it as well. Couple more questions, and maybe for sake of time, so we can get a couple of questions through, I might just call on for one panelist to kind of respond to the next couple of questions, so we could get maybe through a few, because more and more are coming through in the chat. I love it. I just want to make sure we can answer as many as possible. So someone said, is it necessary to have a political science or international relations / development kind of background? I have an active interest in youth delegations, not restricted within like climate and environment, but yeah, essentially, is it necessary to have poli-sci or an international relations kind of background?
I can give a quick answer. The easy answer is no, you don't. Whatever your background is, you can participate. You might find that you discover new interests and you can kind of add them to your bag of goodies of things you're good at and you care about. But literally, no matter what your background is, you can get involved in some way because you have something valuable to contribute.
Beautiful, beautifully put. Awesome. And another question was, how can we move away from the tokenization of youth in these discussions or forums or delegations?
I can start us off here. I know that one thing that Young Diplomats of Canada has done is that we don't necessarily have to say yes to every opportunity. If you see that a space is really tokenizing youth or isn't offering, professional development opportunities, if the space is just making you a box that they've checked, but not really offering you anything in return, I think it's okay to say no. And once we start saying no, well, then they can take that back, maybe think more critically of it, because maybe they didn't do it with malintentions, but it just so happened that that's what it came to be in fruition. But yeah, I think it's about being critical and calling it out when you see it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Christina. Brilliantly put. Another thing as well, this is actually maybe kind of for all of the panelists. I really want to kind of hear this question as well. I like this one. So maybe just like just a few thoughts here and there, but what is the panel's favorite moment in their delegation experience, and what lessons did you learn from them?
I saw that question in the chat and I was reflecting on it. So I have an immediate answer. One of my favorite moments was when I was at the 2017 Global Youth Trends Forum, and all the countries had booths where we were just sharing things about our country. And the Canadian delegation tried to take a step away from, some of the more anecdotal things of Canada. And our booth, we did a presentation on reconciliation and Indigenous relations in what is now known as Canada. And one of my favorite moments is that one of the education ministers was passing by a booth, and it's meant to be, like click, photo shoot, shake hands, but he kept on talking to us and engaging with us because he didn't have any idea about the issues that are still present in Canada today, because I think a lot of us know that sometimes Canada's seen as this, wrongly so, as altruistic society, but we obviously have our own issues. So I laugh when I think back as handlers are trying to move him along, and he's like, no, I want to stay and I want to learn. And he gave us his information. We sent him some resources afterwards. So that was a memorable moment.
Yeah, I can share next. I feel like there's so many different favorite experiences. It's really hard to choose one. I guess my favorite experience technical negotiation in Bangkok in 2018, and there was a negotiation item that was just stuck. It's not moving forward. Countries have different views and stuff, and no one wants to budge. And at the time, we were the youth representative in the room, and we requested the floor, even though it's out of the ordinary procedure, but we requested the floor, and the chair acknowledged us. And we were able to kind of deliver our intervention and tell everyone that this is a very easy to solve solution, and we presented that solution. I'm very proud of my colleagues who were there and delivered the intervention. And in the background, I wrote kind of a solution for the room, and now it lives as a part of the Paris Agreement package. In that 400-page document, there's one line that's our contribution. That's the young people in that room who moved that thing forward. And till this day, I still kind of get a lot of messages, or whenever I'm at a conference, some countries' negotiator will just come up to us and thank us for that moment. And that kind of really built a lot of relationship and built youth credibility in the space as well, that we are there to offer solution, and we are there as an invaluable asset for the negotiation itself. So that's my favorite moments.
Yeah, I would echo that there's so many good moments, or moments that were very profound for me. And a lot of my closest friends I've met at delegations, or they're the ones that you go on your, 1 or 2 week long trips with, and then you're friends forever. But the most recent one that I experience was actually this year on the online or virtual CSW. So I, for context, wrote my undergrad thesis on the Civil War in Sri Lanka. And so I decided that I was going to go to a side event at the commission that had to do with the Civil War in Sri Lanka. And I guess there was some other high level events happening at the same time. So it ended up being just me and all the presenters at this event. So it was a whole panel of grassroots women's activists from Sri Lanka, from the post-conflict setting that I'd researched, and me in a Zoom call for 45 minutes. And I got to ask them whatever I wanted. And it was just such an amazing experience, because you're like researching and observing these things externally from far away. And then you get to hear from the people that are like the absolute experts on what you're studying. And it was such a great moment for me.
Kind of like goosebumps as even I'm hearing that as well. That's amazing. So thank you so much, folks. Really appreciate all of your time and the expertise and the information and experiences that you just shared. I know there's so many questions coming in the chat right now as well, and we didn't get to answer all of the questions that came in. So apologies for that, but if you've got any questions, you can feel free to still stay connected with OCIC and BCCIC as well, but I'll pass it over to Erika to close us out. Everyone.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I think Erika's right. It just warms my heart to see the power and the inspiration and just the insight and experience that all of you bring to this. So thank you for not just bringing your expertise and your experience, but your whole selves fully to this session. An hour is never long enough, and we could do this for forever, but I hope that all of you who are in attendance today have enjoyed today's session. Once again, a huge thank you to Jeffery, Panthea, and Christina for your insights, to Erika for your incredible moderation, and also to our partner organizations, the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, the Senate of Canada that's providing us with a lot of the resources for our tech, as well as Young Diplomats of Canada. But we don't start and end the Policy Matters series here. I want to bring everyone's attention to the fact that next week on Thursday from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we will have a skills building workshop held in partnership with the Intercouncil Network. So that's the kind of umbrella of organizations that includes the Ontario Council for International Cooperation, as well as the British Columbia Council, as well as Youth Climate Lab, who will be presenting some exercises and training opportunities to take away tools to be better policy advocates. This session will be facilitated by youth members of the Policy Corner, who also are members of OCIC's Youth Policymakers Hub. So don't miss it. The link to the Eventbrite will be in the chat. So definitely do your best to make it and to register if you haven't already. And then if you can't make it next week, or you are interested in more opportunities, don't forget that this is only the first in a 5-part series that will continue with next week's policy advocacy tools training. The week after, we'll be taking part in a training session around grassroots mobilization in the digital age. On the 10th and 11th, we will have a weekend-long hackathon, and on the 17th, we'll have a grant writing workshop, once again in partnership with so many incredible national organizations. But I want to once again thank you all for making it here, for sharing this space, and I wish you all the best as you continue in your policy advocacy and youth engagement journeys, wherever you are now and wherever you will be soon. Thank you again, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye now.